Welcome to Radio Free Flint. This is Arthur Bush. Today's podcast episode is about Ernie Harwell, the famed Detroit Tigers sports broadcaster. Ernie Harwell left a warm and rich legacy in Michigan and all across America with his beautiful sportscasting. We're going to invite several people to talk about his life and what he meant to them. Including Jack Lessenberry, who is formerly with the Michigan Public Radio out of Ann Arbor. He knew Ernie Harwell and is going to tell us what kind of person he was and what he thinks his legacy is. Also, we have several people from Flint, Sue Meisner-Kelly, a school teacher. We have Amy Mosher Rao, who was a volunteer for a local charity, David Cobb of Flushing, and lastly, a former Detroit Tiger farm system player, Jeffrey Natchez of Flint, Michigan. And Jeff will also share with us his impressions as a kid growing up with Ernie Harwell on the transistor radio. This is Arthur Bush. Welcome to Radio Free Flint. I have the esteemed Jack Lessenberry, a legendary journalist.
Arthur, that makes me sound like I'm dead.
Not yet. He's retired professor from Wayne State University. Been a political analyst for Michigan Public Radio. He also has worked for a number of years for the Toledo Blade as an ombudsman, and a story on Frontline about Dr. Jack, one of my favorite characters.
Dr. Jack Kevorkian, that's right.
What caught my attention about your resume, Jack, was that you were a collector of the Michigan Manual.
They're a fascinating treasure trove. You look at the earlier ones, they have railroad maps, all sorts of fascinating stuff in there.
What I asked Jack to discuss with us is Ernie Harwell to start with. Jack, you knew Ernie Harwell.
I did. I first met him, well, like you, Arthur, I grew up listening to him. And I first met him, I did a magazine story on him in 1983. We got along, and he always called me the old professor. I had the privilege of sitting in the broadcast booth with him a couple times during games, and I knew him for the rest of his life. And he eventually, got pancreatic cancer. He called me in 2009 and let me know about that. He really didn't want to see anybody in his last months. I talked to him a couple of times on the phone, but he was gracious. He was decent. He was very modest. What you saw is what you got. I think he was the voice of baseball to, I think, millions of us in Michigan. And it's hard. It's still hard to sometimes think that he's not there anymore.
And there was something about him, and I've talked to several people in the Flint area, and they always talk about this good feeling that they had when they listened to him, sort of like they thought the whole world was well when they heard his voice.
Well, that's exactly right. He told me some of his secrets to that. One thing that he did, he knew that a lot of people, especially when the Tigers were hot, were at work and they weren't allowed to listen, but they'd go sneak a couple minutes. They'd go out back, or they'd go for a smoke break or the bathroom and listen to the game. And so he said it was important to mention the score a lot. A lot of announcers, you put on a game, it takes them a long time to tell the score. But every minute or two, he'd say, Tigers are ahead of the Rangers 3-2 or whatever it was. And of course, he had all these marvelous stories. He kept all these, he had these little note cards with little, reminding him about different stories. He kept statistics on all the players, and his head was just an encyclopedic record of baseball.
His stories that he told, which the book that I had shared with you before we started, was full of wonderful stories going back into the 1800s. And he seemed to tell those as if he lived then.
Right. But he knew, of course, he was born in 1918, but he knew just about all of the great people in baseball. Connie Mack, he knew Ty Cobb. I don't know if he knew him well, but he interviewed him. He introduced him a couple times to stadium crowds. Leo DeRocher, he actually once got in a physical fight. Leo DeRocher grabbed him and they wrestled around for a while. You don't think of Ernie as a fighter, but he knew virtually everybody who was important in baseball throughout the 20th century.
And that southern drawl, that silky southern drawl of Ernie's was a lure for my dad. That was an elixir for him. He's from
I think you're on to something there, Arthur. I think that's true. And you know what? A lot of famous baseball announcers have been from the South. In fact, Ernie worked briefly early in his career with Red Barber, who, was a nationally famous voice of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And and he had a Southern drawl, but I think people really it wasn't like a thick Cajun drawl you had a hard time understanding, but I like the word silky that you used. He really had this comforting, warm, down-home voice.
But he had partnered up with George Kell for a period of time.
Right.
Who was the Hall of Fame baseball player, third baseman for the Detroit Tigers, who also incidentally was from Arkansas.
Swifton, Arkansas.
Which is in the northeast corner of Arkansas, not too far from Paragould, Jonesboro area, which was one of the areas, if you put a heat map on, I guess, where we find a lot of Southern auto migrants had come from. I mean, we have whole sections of town in both of our cities that, have monikers like Bertucky and Little Missouri and so forth. And having that combination in the booth really gave it an iced tea afternoon, sit on the porch and listen to Ernie.
Well, ironically, George Kell is why Ernie Harwell ended up in Detroit. I don't know that they're especially close, but in 1959, the announcer had been Van Patrick, who you may or may not remember.
Oh, yeah.
And he was on Channel 4 as well. But he had a conflict with an advertiser, and George Kell suggested, well, why don't you take a look at this guy, Ernie Harwell. At the time, Ernie Harwell was the voice of the Baltimore Orioles. And so one thing led to another, and Ernie Harwell came to Detroit, starting with the 1960 season, and except for the infamous interlude where he was fired for a couple of years by WJR and the Tigers, Bo Schembechler, all that, those horrible couple of years, he was on the air until, I believe, 2002 when he finally retired.
Now, as I remember, they did the radio broadcast. Ernie wasn't a television guy.
He did television briefly. I think they alternated very early in the 1960s, but mainly Ernie he did television once in a while, but mainly he was a radio play-by-play announcer, and that's what he wanted to do.
And then later, Cal went off onto the radio or on the television only.
Right, that's right.
And took a lighter schedule, I think.
Cal still ran an auto dealership back in Swifton, Arkansas, so he didn't want to have to be going to every game.
Well, it was funny because when these guys would talk about the players, especially Ernie, there was a period of time in which he described what their off-season job was.
Right. That was back when players had to have off-season jobs.
Funny as heck, I thought, because I never envisioned the guy that was, sitting on second base there was, sweeping the floor at the local grocery.
Well, Richie Hebner, if you remember, Richie Hebner was an infielder for the Tigers. He dug graves. He was a grave digger in the offseason.
Oh, Lord. Unfortunately, and when I started this podcast, I didn't really want to talk about Bo Schembechler at all. But in interviewing 6 people, every single one talked about that incident. But tell us what led to that and what was all about, if you know.
Well, there's always been a great controversy about what happened. And they put the blame mainly, most people think it was Jeff Odenwald at WJR. And Bo Schembechler had just become, remember, he was the famous football coach to become general manager of the Tigers. And to some extent, to put it politely, he was a great football coach who knew absolutely nothing about what he was doing and nothing with baseball. And they got the cockamamie idea that Ernie Harwell was old hat, and they wanted to appeal to a younger crowd. And with the exception of perhaps New Coke, if you remember New Coke in 1985, firing Ernie Harwell was probably the worst PR decision ever made by anybody. And you almost had the town went nuts. So eventually they were forced to bring him back, partnered with the 2 other guys that had to replace him, some people named Riz and Rathburn, who never were very popular. And then eventually Ernie Harwell came back full time. It may well have led to the downfall of Tom Monahan as owner of the team, but people did not realize that Ernie Harwell was not an announcer. He was an integral part of the Detroit psyche by that time. He'd really become the background voice. Everybody loved his voice. Even people who didn't love baseball loved Ernie Harwell. You thought about summer, you thought about a picnic, you thought about, this was way before iPods, it was way before Alexa. You'd have a transistor radio out there somewhere and you hear Ernie Harwell's voice. And Ernie Harwell had the ability, even if the Tigers were terrible, the Tigers were losing 12-2 to the Yankees in the 3rd inning, he had the ability to make you still care about the game and listen to it because of the Ernie Harwell was not just a play-by-play announcer. As you mentioned, Arthur, he had these wonderful stories. He brought you into the game. He did this thing, he would, the one thing he did that was not accurate, he'd say the ball would be hit into the stands. He'd say, well, that was that was caught by a man from Flint, or that was caught by a lady from Flat Rock. Of course, he made that up. When I was real young, I wondered how he knew that stuff. Well, of course, he didn't, but people liked hearing it. People liked hearing it, and he made, whether you were there or not, he made you feel you were part of the game.
Exactly. That drew us together, that notion that somebody from Belleville or from Trenton or Augrey could all be part of the same thing, that we're all cheering for the same team,
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And some of my listeners have speculated that Ernie had a Michigan Atlas in the booth.
He may have, but after living here for 40 years, he knew Michigan pretty well, and he stayed here year round. He lived in Farmington Hills most of the time when I knew him. He lived in Detroit earlier, and then he and his wife, when they got older, lived in Fox Run out in Novi.
Ernie's, as you mentioned, he was he understood the tempo of the baseball game, and he understood something that not many people, including myself, really get. And that is,
won the Giants the pennant when they playoff over Brooklyn Dodgers. Everybody remembers the radio announcer saying over and over again, "The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant." Well, you know who the television announcer was that day? Ernie Harwell. And Ernie Harwell just said, "It's gone." And he just showed the action on the field and listened to the roar of the crowd. Of course, most people still didn't have television in 1951, so this isn't remembered that well. But he thought, you have a moment that dramatic, this dramatic home run to win the pennant, you don't need to say anything. You just let people look at it. Journalists, often I would interview, especially after the Kevorkian cases, both sides would put these very expensive expert witnesses on. And I would talk to the jurors after, and they'd say, "Oh, we couldn't figure out any of that. So we didn't pay attention to any of that. We just, ruled it all out. We don't know anything about medicine or science, and we couldn't, and medical ethics. And so we just disregarded that." So, but I think you're absolutely right. But yeah, Ernie knew how to use silence, and he knew how to use words, and he was a completely authentic human being.
To kind of wind up on Ernie here, a couple things I wanted to ask you about just to get your impressions of. One of them is he had all these euphemisms and he had these sayings and he coined all these phrases that still live in the memories and hearts of his fans and of Tiger fans everywhere.
Right.
Did you have a favorite one?
He stood there like a house by the side of the road. And of course, his home run, it's long gone. He actually adopted that later, but remember early on, he would say when somebody struck out, he stood there like a house by the side of the road. What was your favorite one?
Mine, I like the one where he says he got caught doing excessive window shopping.
That's right. That's for a called strikeout. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And one of the things, he stood there by like the house by the side of the road, I adopted as my own over the years.
Good. He'd be pleased about that.
But Ernie Harwell, he actually had a stutter when he was young.
Exactly. Well, he was quite a stutterer as a child, and he worked hard on it. He mentioned that at his Hall of Fame speech when he was inducted. He said, "I was born tongue-tied," something like, and thanks to the grace of God, I'm not tongue-tied anymore. Well, he said he felt tongue-tied at that moment. He just worked through it. He worked really hard at it. He grew up in a poor family in rural Georgia, but he worked hard to make something of himself. He was a very religious man, but he wasn't obnoxious about it. If you weren't religious, he didn't try to convert you. He didn't try to proselytize, but it was a big part of his life. He was a very modest man. Once I was doing some writing about World War II. I was looking at some pictures of some men in a landing craft on Wake Island.
Those poems, and somebody's attributed his most famous poetry reading, which isn't really a poem, it's a verse of scripture.
The Voice of the Turtle.
Yes.
There was one of these guys that looked like Ernie Harwell. And I said, "This looks like you." He said, "Well, it is." He was a Marine in World War II and saw heavy combat, and he never talked about that.
No.
He was a fascinating man.
It is the house by the side of the road phrase. And it turns out that Ernie learned to work through that stutter by reading poems.
And that was one of the poems. I forgot that. You're exactly right, Arthur.
And
House by the side of the road.
The house by the side of the road. And he read other poems. It just, as I got into looking at some of those, I remember them, I remember those. Now, Ernie, to his credit, besides kind of giving us a little white lie about who caught the ball, where they were from, he modified the voice of the turtle. Were you aware of that?
No, I don't think I was.
the Bible, you will find that it's, turtles don't speak.
Right.
So it's turtle doves is what the scripture says. That's
That's right.
passage of scripture,
It does work.
especially
does
in
work.
Michigan where we have a lot of turtles. But this is how it goes. If you go to the Song of Solomon verse in
Like it was officially spring and opening day, and everybody loves opening day. I remember hearing him say that opening day in April 1966. They opened against the Yankees, and the Tigers won 2-1, and Joe Pepitone hit a home run. Now, don't ask me where I put my keys. Don't ask me what I ate for breakfast yesterday, but I remember that from April 12th, 1966. So that shows how powerful memories somebody like Ernie Harwell can create and evoke in people.
Well, another thing that he created and evoked is reading that. How did that make you feel when you heard that on opening day, which was one of his biggest accomplishments? He was a broadcaster during some of the most tumultuous, turbulent times
Exactly.
in Detroit. And that was during the 1960s, especially 67 and 68. I'll say this, and maybe you have some comment on it. It seemed like he was the voice that brought I use this word calm about him a lot, but he brought people together not only around the game, but his voice made us think that, everything was going to be okay. We're all
That's right.
Together.
The day the riot started, broadcasting from Detroit, and they told him not to mention it. They told him not to mention because you could see the smoke, things like that. It hadn't reached its full height yet, but that was on Sunday, I think July 24th, 1967. And baseball's still here. They told him not. He was on the air when he had some qualms about that. He didn't know quite what to do, but they said don't mention it, and he didn't.
Because
I know.
Do you think we'll ever see somebody else down the road that has the same skill as this guy?
In fact, he was more progressive than I was. He was very much in favor of interleague play during the season. I was sort of a purist. I thought they shouldn't do that. But he was a very conventional as well as a very modern man, and for his time. And I just hope people remember him. He wrote a number of books. Diamond Gems is a collection of his anecdotes. Tune to Baseball was his first book. Well, I think we'll see somebody else who's great but different. A fair amount about the past and a fair amount about the present. But I learned a long time ago I can't predict the future. But I hope so. And he would like that, and he would like very much baseball to still continue to be our national game. People should still read those. And if you ever want to hear, if you have any ambitions of being a broadcast announcer, especially for sports, and you want to hear what the best sounds like, get yourself some tapes, and they're available, CDs. Listen to how Ernie Harwell did it, because nobody ever did it better, in my opinion.
Well, Jack Lessenberry, thanks for joining me on Radio Free Flint. Appreciate your
Arthur, it's an honor, and I'm going to keep listening to you, and if I can help with anything else, holler at me.
Our next guest is Sue Meisner-Kelly to share her memories of Ernie Harwell.
I've listened to Ernie Harwell since I was a child. When it was on the radio at home, and if it were summertime, I would hear him, or as I grew into adulthood and worked as a teacher, I would listen to him on the car radio at the end of the school day as I was headed home or wherever else I was going.
What was it about Ernie Harwell and listening to him that you enjoyed so much?
It was sort of a grounding point for me. I knew that if Ernie Harwell was speaking, all was well with the world. I loved his opening day reading from the scriptures. The passage comes from the Song of Solomon. In the Hebrew scriptures, it is an allegory of the love story between God and God's people, the Hebrew nation. Long gone!
So go ahead and read it for us so we can.
For now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land.
What does the verse itself, what is the context of that verse?
The context of the verse is that the people of Israel have just returned from the exile in Babylon, and they're going home to their own land. and God is promising that the land is going to flourish. It did one time in their history during the time when David was king.
Wow.
That was the best time in their whole history.
The land that was going to flourish in Ernie Harwell's mind was where?
Well, I think it was here. I think it was Tiger Stadium. I think it was Michigan in trouble. I think that his legacy is that he was a good man, a gentle man, an honest man, a funny man, somebody to whom everybody could look up, and somebody who would always be remembered for the way he called those baseball games. I mean, he had his own style, and nobody copied it, and he never changed it.
Now, did he have a particular saying or expression that was your favorite?
Well, as I mentioned before, I would hear him say, "Long gone," and that sort of lifted the cares of the day off of my back.
When Ernie Harwell was young, he battled with a speech impediment.
I read that also. So he had to practice over and over and over in order to get rid of that speech impediment.
Harwell became a big fan of poetry. And of course, The Voice of the Turtle, as he called it, was not the only poem that he would read on the air. There were other poems that he read, which maybe...
The House by the Side of the Road.
Yes, The House by the Side of the Road, exactly.
And if somebody let a ball go by, he would say that the player just stood there like the house by the side of the road.
All right, we have Amy Mosier Rao, who's from Swartz Creek. Welcome, Amy. Tell us your story about Ernie Harwell.
So many years ago, I used to volunteer in the nonprofit arena, and we were getting donations for an event for a silent auction, and I had sent out several letters. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was there at the office. I was volunteering for Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. I got a phone call. Somebody said, "Okay, Amy, you've got a phone call on blah blah blah," and I got on the phone. And got on and I said, "Hello, this is Amy. How can I help you?" And Ernie Harwell was on the other line. And of course, I immediately knew who I was talking to just from his voice. He's like, "Amy, this is Ernie Harwell calling, and I just want you to know I got your letter." And I was like, I cannot believe this. I was stunned. And he's like, "And I just want you to know that I'm going to be sending some Tiger memorabilia." I can't even remember what he said he was going to send me. I was so shocked. Like, I mean, you could have knocked me out of my chair with a feather. I was just stunned as to who I was talking to. He was so, I was almost speechless. But after talking to him a couple of minutes, and, you know, my heart was just warmed. And I basically, you know, when he told me, he went down this like list of 10 things that he was going to send for our silent auction, and he hoped it was successful. And I said, all I could think to say was, "Well, thank you very much, Mr. Harwell. It was really nice chatting with you." And I was very starstruck, but I'd grown up a Tigers fan. I mean, I played ball when I was a kid.
What was it about Ernie Harwell that was so special to you?
Just because I was such a big Tigers fan, and I loved listening to him. I love hearing his voice. He's a genuinely heartwarming person, and you could tell he loves what he does. Just, you can hear it all in his voice. So that was pretty much it for me. When I was volunteering, I would send out letters. People would just send stuff. They wouldn't, you know, call me. And so that was just a really nice personal touch from him.
Now, when you listened to Ernie Harwell, you were a baseball fan. What were some of your favorite things about his broadcasts that you loved?
I mean, I just loved listening to him talk. It's been so many years, Art. It's hard to,
and
you know.
Many years later, you still are Ernie Harwell fan.
Absolutely. I would, yeah. Anything that comes out about Ernie Harwell, I would purchase.
Thanks a lot, Amy. I appreciate your time for sharing your memory of Ernie Harwell. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, Art.
All right. We have Dave Cobb of Flushing, and he's a Tiger fan. Welcome,
Yeah.
Dave.
Hey, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great.
Great.
So Dave, I understand that you met Ernie Harwell once.
Yeah. Actually, it's always a tradition of the family to go down to a Tiger game. My birthday's around Mother's Day, so the kids or my parents or anybody for a birthday present, they'd always say, "Well, we take the family down to a Tiger game." So anyway, we did this for years, and of course, when I got my own family, it was always a fun thing to do, so we did it. So anyway, I got two girls, and they're softball players, and so they know baseball a little bit. And my youngest daughter, Jessica, she's a big Kirk Gibson fan. Okay, so anyway, I thought, well, we're going to go down to Tiger Stadium, and I'd like to get her to meet Kirk Gibson. So I said maybe the best thing to do is go down to batting practice. And you got the ball players kind of lounging around, and sometimes you can get a ball, sometimes you can talk to them. So anyway, we got down there and we saw Kirk Gibson, and I kept kind of yelling at him a little bit. "Hey, Kurt, come here." And of course, he was just ignoring me. I know he heard me. And I'm sitting there. I thought, okay, just be patient. So anyway, it wasn't working. But anyway, I looked over by the Tiger dugout, and there was Ernie Harwell just leaning against the dugout. And I thought, I'm gonna go over there and say something to Ernie. He was by himself. Wasn't nobody else around. So I went over there with my two daughters, and I said, "Ernie, how you doing?" I said, "I want to introduce my two daughters." He goes, "Well, how you doing?" He goes, "Well, where are you from?" And we told him we're from Flushing. And he started talking. He just says, "Well, how was your trip down here? And did you want anything? Did you want to know anything about the stadium or anything?" And then they started talking to my daughter about her Little League. And asking her questions, what position she plays, and did she like it, and then the kind of conversation went on, and I was asking him about the ball team. Of course, the Tigers, I think at the time were just doing so, and so he talked about that for a while, and so anyway, I started getting people, I think, start seeing that, and they start crowding around. And so anyway, I said, well, listen, maybe we should just step aside here if people want to come in and talk to Ernie. And so he looked at it, he says, "Well, it was very nice meeting you." And he shook our hands, and we kind of stepped aside, and it was just a very good conversation.
How do you when you think of Ernie Harwell, what do you think about other than that particular thing? I mean, obviously you followed his career.
Yeah. With Ernie.
What do you make of him? What do you make of this guy?
As a person, I think he was, he took his responsibilities really serious in what he did and what he presented, how the Tigers and the city of Detroit looked, and even Michigan. Obviously, anywhere, our generation, anywhere you were at in the summertime, if you heard that voice, you knew what was going on.
How'd that voice make you feel?
It made you feel safe. It made you feel like honest. It was like Walter Cronkite. When you turn on the news and you listen to Walter Cronkite, it was really no opinion. You just thought what he was saying was the truth. And he wasn't making no beefs about it, about issues.
He did say occasionally that the guy out on the right field foul line was from Tecumseh or Trenton.
Oh yeah, you heard that when you're listening to the ball game. And he says a foul ball, and a guy from Clarkston caught that. And you always kind of thought, how in the heck did he know that? And it was funny to hear that, but that's the way it was. But you thought the guy was, he knew what he was talking about, and that's how you looked at him.
Was there a favorite expression that he had that you particularly liked?
Oh yeah, what was it? What the heck was that one? He sat on something about a house. He's like at a house standing at the side of the road, watch the ball go by or something. something like that. Or
Mhm.
I like the one thing where he'd say, I got this guy's name. He'd always talk about the umpires. And, you'd always get a disagreement or something going on. And he'd always explain what was going on. And he'd always sit there and say, and Mr. Shylock, the umpire, doesn't agree with that. As you went on, and these umpires had these weird names. And you always
that was actually his name. That was actually his name.
That was actually his name. Oh, yeah, definitely.
I mean,
But,
he always called him Mr., though. He always called him Mr.
It always called him Mr., like respect, because the umpire, I mean, when you're playing baseball, most of us did, you might not like the call, but they're they deserve the respect because of what they're doing, they're running the game.
So,
and that's how he did it.
So Ernie Harwell represented to you respect and professionalism and excellence.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it was, I think he represented a symbol of not only Detroit, but I think of Michigan. Do you remember when Bo Schembechler became the general manager of the Tigers?
Yes.
Yeah. What's one of the first things he did?
Got rid of Ernie.
He got rid of Ernie, and it was like, that's just like firing your dad. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, all of a sudden Bo was this guy, University of Michigan, you thought he was great, and all of a sudden it's like, who is this guy coming in and firing Ernie? That's like going home from work and kicking your dog or something.
Yeah.
All
right,
I mean?
David.
And and to me, that's what it was like.
Well, it wasn't the smartest thing that Bo Schembechler ever did. Let me put it that way.
No, he shouldn't have even been in that position.
David Cobb from Flushing, Michigan. Thank you for joining Radio Free Flint. Appreciate your time and your sharing your story about Ernie Harwell, a legend. And maybe we'll give you a shout out here on some other stuff about baseball if you're a baseball fan.
Heck yeah, I'd be happy to help you out. Great, it was great talking to you.
Thank you. Okay, goodbye.
Okay, Art.
Our last guest is Jeffrey Natchez, a Flint optometrist. Jeffrey was drafted by the Detroit Tigers and played a number of years in the Detroit Tiger farm system. Hello, Jeffrey Natchez. Welcome back to Radio Free Flint. I want you to know, Jeffrey, you're the only person that's made it here twice.
Wow.
And that's saying something. So
I'm honored.
Do you remember the guy that would call a home run and say it was long gone?
Ernie Harwell. I mean, he's a legend. I mean, when you talk about Tiger baseball, his name might come up before the players. The two things I remember about Ernie is we were playing 1967, the last weekend of the season. The Tigers are fighting it out for the pennant, and they've got a doubleheader on Saturday and a doubleheader on Sunday. And I think we listened to all four of those games in the street. We were throwing the football around, playing touch football on the street in front of Scott Taylor's house on Comanche. And in between plays, we'd run up. We had somebody had a radio out there turned up way loud, and so we were listening to the baseball games, seeing if the Tigers were going to make it to the World Series or not. But we were definitely listening to Ernie Harwell for four straight games and playing football on the street. Well, the other thing I remember is in the early 90s, they decided that it was time for Ernie to go. Bo Schembechler was the president, left Michigan, became the president of the Tigers, and they decided for whatever reason that they were going to go in a different direction, and Ernie was out. And he actually was out for a year or two, and then, Mike Ilitch bought the team and took over, and plus, the fans were up in arms. They wanted Ernie back. And, it was probably the first time that Bo Schembechler ever had, anybody overshadow him, as far as the state of Michigan. They weren't happy with Bo. They wanted Ernie back. And they when Mike Ilitch became the owner, Ernie was back.
how would you describe him today? What do you think his legacy is?
I mean, I think if you ask people, the baby boomers, male and female, who their favorite announcer was, or in any sport, and I'm talking about, Michigan people, I don't think we realized we were spoiled because, that's the only announcer that, I think he came in 1960, so I was 7 years old. I probably maybe listened to the games a little bit before that, but I mean, for all those years, that's who we listened to. So we didn't really have anything to compare it to. I don't think we realized that we were listening to greatness until later in life. And now that we look back and we go, oh my gosh, we had the best,
Right. And did he have a favorite expression that you liked?
The only one I remember is the one you already quoted, and that's about when somebody hit a home run. That one is long gone. Definitely what they remember most about the Detroit Tigers. You're going to get Al Kaline, you're going to get Lance Parrish, you're going to get Mark the Bird, but you're going to get Ernie Harwell right up there at the top too.
Okay, buddy. Take care now.
Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Be safe.
Ernie Harwell was part of my earliest memories of my home in Flint. His soft Georgia drawl echoed across the kitchen in the evenings when the Detroit Tigers were playing America's game. My dad himself, a Southerner, loved to listen to Ernie while smoking his cigarettes and smiling at his homespun one-liners. Soon my dad would smile as Ernie gleefully announced, "It's long gone," way back in the center field bleachers. Stormin' Norman Cash has hit it a mile. There was something about that voice, the language he used, and the pictures he painted with words that was soothing. It was as if he was Norman Rockwell with a microphone instead of a brush. Looking back at the iconic Ernie Harwell, I trusted Ernie Harwell and everything he said about baseball. Ernie brought us together as a family. We loved baseball. You felt like you were on the front porch in Macon or Jonesboro or Atlanta, complete with the iced tea and your ears glued to the transistor radio. Ernie took Dad and Mom and me far away from the chaos of the 1960s to a calm place where there were heroes and dreams. Ernie took us through the pennant races in 1967, and then when the Tigers came up short, he then took us through the championship year of 1968. His voice of calm and togetherness was in stark contrast to the Detroit around us with its unrest and rioting. Ernie was more than a sports broadcaster. He was a cultural icon. His many decades announcing baseball gave him an audience that appreciated his manners. Everyone was Mr. or Mrs., and his pleasing kindness even to the opposition. His method and mannerisms never belied his entertainment value. He spun lines like Dennis McLain is on the mound for the Tigers, and he kicks and deals to the batter. Ernie Harwell has been gone now for 10 years, yet the warm feelings from his fans persist. He represented the best of a generation. He was kind, respectful, professional, dedicated, and human. The people of Michigan were blessed to have such a man come visit them in their leisure hours. He brought a soothing brand of entertainment that in hindsight was perhaps better than the game itself.